Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. I am G, and today I'm going to be showing off all of the anime that I received for November. Not a lot, but I think there's some really standout shows here. All of them are limited or collector's editions, and pretty good mix. So I'm going to get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy. First and foremost, we have the second half limited edition of a particular title, one that I've recently watched and enjoyed for the first time with this disc release, and that is Sword Art Online Alicization War of Underworld. This is the Madman limited edition box. The first half, so the first 12 or so episodes for both the first season of Alicization and War of the Underworld, both had a standard only release to then be included or put into the limited box that came with the second half. So for those who are not up to date with Sword Art Online, just generally, whether it be the franchise, the anime, War of Underworld, or the Alicization arc is the original final arc of the web novels for Sword Art Online when it was published as a web novel. And there's a sense of finality to the series that comes with the themes, the characters, the plot for this part of the story. Having recently just watched both seasons of this, which is the full 50 episodes or 48 episodes, you can see how much of the story prior to this had been building to this eventuality with these characters, with Kirito's personal growth as a character, with the roles that all of the supporting cast and of course Asuna plays within that, and how it adapts and expands on ideas of human AI relationships, on the reality and the need or the growth of technology over these several years that the story takes place through. There's just a really interesting look at the humanity's relationship with technology, which has always been very prevalent within Sword Art Online, that just comes to the forefront with Alicization. So ultimately, once Sal got so popular, once it found a publisher, the author has since continued and expanded on this story. Alicization is no longer the end of the series, but for those who were originally reading the story online, whenever he would update it, this would have been the end, and having experienced it, I can understand how, why, and to what end the series completed on. I'm interested now to read the future arcs, things like Moon Cradle and such, because it would be interesting to see how the characters move from here. I don't know if there's plans to adapt those novels into anime as well. We do have the upcoming Asuna, like the Sao progressive film, about to be aired here in Australia actually, so I am going to go see that fairly soon. But that is a retelling of the original Aincrad arc and Asuna's story sort of before and during her meeting Kirito. So it's a much more focused Asuna piece, which I think pairs quite nicely with the roles that both of these characters play by the end. Anyway, it was really solid. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I've said this before, but over the last, I don't even know how long, 18 months, 2 years, Sword Art Online has become a series, and I must preface this by saying I never hated SAO. I never thought it was bad. In fact, I enjoyed the original first season for what it is. I never thought it was the best series ever, but I watched it as it came out in 2012. I stand by the fact that it has one of the most effective first episodes of hooking you into the storyline. And for all of its faults, of which there are many, don't get me wrong, it's a series that has, in my mind, been able to battle and confront a lot of its criticisms over the years. Some valid, some, little, probably just more nitpicks and less valid than others. But when we look at the current light novel market and trends and how characters and protagonists, namely, are being written, Sword Art Online it's definitely not a perfect series, but its characters are always trying hard to be good people, to make morally good and understandable choices and help people and save or fix situations in the best way that they can without hurting or causing harm to others. And in a post-Shield hero, post-Goblin Slayer, which is not, these are all different but similar genres of isekai, of video game, of just straight up fantasy. When you look at the character, even ReZero to a certain extent, when you look at the characters and the protagonists and how they treat other people, and namely the people in their lives, it's quite clear that Kirito, in my opinion, works as a much more understandably likable guy, right? It's certainly not the best thing ever made. I don't think that even by the end the villains of Sword Art Online have ever been that captivating or believable or anything but just really overtly Sunday morning cartoon esque goofy and dumb, and just the series has its problems. I find the most interesting stuff for SAO to be about the characters, our protagonists, the supporting characters, the people who are being affected and are not a cackling villain, are always really interesting to see their relationships with each other, the relationship they have with other people in game and outside of game, the relationships that people develop, the true emotional connections that people develop with others, even if they're not inherently human, which is one of the big aspects that SAO has always been about. From season 1, we've had Yui, Kirito and Asuna's digital AI daughter, and their relationship with her. Plotlines like things in Mother's Rosario, even Gun Gale Online, how player killing is perceived, and how the difference between, or the two completely different sides of human connection and empathy and emotion when it comes to digital spaces. On one extreme, you do have, people, player killers, people who don't, they spend their time causing as much destruction, hurting other players in a way that may be crucial to the functionality of that game, and you're not inherently a bad person, but if you do that, it's part of the fun for some people. But when you place those sorts of attitudes in a game like Sword Art Online, where if you die in the game, you die in real life, and pushing that to its natural conclusion of there's not the disconnect of, like, this is just, someone will actually be hurt if I do this, and I'm actually affecting other people's lives through my actions. So there's that side of digital relationships and digital emotional connection. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum is people emotionally connecting and becoming protective of, or falling in love with, or whatever else it might be, technology that isn't strictly, which just isn't human. The idea of AI and how it plays a part in our lives. People who do find their Roomba to feel like a pet more than, a piece of technology. People who speak to Alexa or Siri or other, helpful programs or helpers in ways that you feel like there's a friendship or a relationship there. Humans are incredibly empathic creatures, and so it makes total sense that when we're presented with a technology or software or whatever else it is that mimics recognizable human or animal behavior, we can grow attached like they are a quote-unquote real person, a real pet, whatever it might be. Even pushing that back further to the idea of a digital pet, things like Tamagotchi, it's quite interesting, and it's obviously something that this creator and this series was thinking about for a long time, and it's nice to see those themes crystallized in this series with this particular part. I would say that if we never got any more Sword Art Online outside of the progressive stuff, if we never saw Moon Cradle and the Ring one that's currently the series being released, I don't think, well, I can't say. I haven't read those novels, but it would make sense if this was the final part of the main Sword Art storyline that ever was adapted, because it is kind of the final point for these characters in a big way. But yeah, it's an interesting one. It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful in a way that these sorts of action series can be. There's obviously a lot of care having been put into this series at certain points. And for as cheesy and silly as certain elements of the series always has been, again, there's very much a power friendship vibe, overcoming insurmountable evil, or just not insurmountable, but just extremely over the top evil for the greater good. It's silly and dumb and cheesy, but there's a reason those things are tropes. There's a reason stories use them, and it's because it's a effective payoff for having spent time with these characters, and to see them succeed at the end is, there's always good stuff. Oh god though, it does get pretty full on with the violence for this last part, which when knowing that the characters, and obviously these are all not real people anyway, but in universe characters not having pain limiters on is quite affecting. Anyway, it's not the best. Like, it's fine, it's fun. I legitimately kind of was worried for a while because I didn't know much about Alicization going in, aside from it was the part of the story where Kirito got a boyfriend. And, yeah, it was very effective. I will give it that. I think the story managed to share what it wanted without getting too lost in all of the other stuff. It's still overly talky. The kind of smaller, quieter parts that isn't trying to info dump video game lore on you constantly is the better stuff. But yeah, I don't need to really convince people one way or the other as to trying Sword Art Online. It's hugely popular, and for as much as people may, make fun of fans or make fun of people who do enjoy it, or call it, really boring or cliche or dumb, I do think that if you haven't revisited the series, or you've been avoiding it because of the bad kind of reception, or you kind of haven't wanted to try any of the other parts because of how weak certain elements of the middle season especially were, I would encourage you to give this to try this out. It is better than a lot of people, or a lot of the negative sentiment gives it credit for. It is better, again, in this post-isekai world wherein a cynical, terrible, unlikable person is our main character and who we're supposed to root for. Kirito, with his genuinely kind of not always perfect, but just wanting to help people and make sure that other people are enjoying themselves. This is worth a look, and it does gain a lot more of my respect, both in the creator as an author in addressing issues that people have brought up with his work before, and expanding more on the stories, basically with Progressive becoming almost a rewrite of the earlier books because of said issues. I think it's just, it's fine. There's a reason it has stayed popular despite the negative criticism. We have the Australian complete box release of Hunter x Hunter. This is the 2011 anime series, obviously. This is a recent re-release with all 148 episodes in one box. So it's just collecting the 5 singles that were released here in Australia. I have made it no secret that I adore Hunter x Hunter and Togashi's stuff in general, but this series was what made me a fan. I hadn't ever watched the previous version of Hunter x Hunter. I hadn't ever read any of Togashi's manga. I hadn't seen any of Yu Yu Hakusho. It was very much, this was my gateway to this franchise, and I watched it from day one. I watched the first episode as it aired on Crunchyroll, and I fell in love almost instantly. This is I don't want to say long running. It's a longer shonen title. Again, at 148, 8 episodes, adapting a solid chunk of the Hunter x Hunter manga, which is ongoing from Yoshihiro Togashi, and currently on hiatus, as fairly normal for this series. Runs in Shonen Jump, and is about our boy protagonist Gon, his 3 friends, Kurapika, Killua, and Leorio, as they become hunters within, this large hunter association, and in doing so they gain a license to go on all of these different adventures together and sometimes apart. Now, the thing about this series in particular, and it's something that a lot of fans of Togashi have kind of framed the series as, is that he's never afraid to have permanent death. He's never afraid to completely betray your expectations for shonen series, especially considering the typical tropes for a Jump adventure story. And for Gon and his friends, although they may seem initially a lot like a more typical Shonen Jump optimistic protagonist, or kind of the idiot savant, or just kind of the likable idiot who's about to save the world. There's a lot more dubious moral grey with all of the characters, but including our protagonist, who more typically in a Jump series would be the morally upright, unbendable justice of this world. They're representative of the correct beliefs, or they're representing the generally seen, moral good or correct outcome. Not so much, or not inherently the case in Hunter x Hunter, and for that I have always really appreciated it. It has a fantastic cast of characters. This is a series that does not suffer from badly written villains. And all of them are really interesting. Majority of them are really interesting, really capable, really captivating. For many, if you haven't seen Hunter x Hunter yet, you may just recognize a lot of the villains on their own, because people love them, right? They're just as beloved as the main cast. And all of the supporting characters, I think there isn't too many characters within the series that are overwhelmingly hated due to being badly written or just uninteresting. It's a series that deals with a lot of really very dark themes. And it's just I've loved it for a long time. 10 years now. Where has the time gone? I don't know. But it's fun, sometimes heartbreaking, exhilarating, interesting. It plays to and thus betrays your expectations in a lot of times. It's one of those series that, like with a lot of Togashi's stuff, it's not always inherently obvious as to what the outcome will be. He doesn't follow the shonen script very often, because there's a lot of times where you do think you expect where things are going, but then you will be confronted by your choice being completely wrong. Hunter x Hunter, I highly encourage people to try it. I think it's on Netflix nowadays. It's also still on Crunchyroll for those interested, and on disc from Viz in the US, and obviously Madman here. I love it, and it's probably one of my favorite shonen adaptations. And I say that with all genuinity, because this, in my opinion, and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is not a Jump title, obviously, but is a shonen series, kind of kickstarted this new wave of shonen adaptations that took things by series. Haikyuu is another kind of contemporaneous series to this, wherein rather than having an ongoing, never-stopping, forever marathon of a anime adaptation a la Naruto and Bleach and One Piece, now series are seeing shorter, self-contained seasons, with farther spacing and less inclusion of filler material, etc., etc. Obviously, perfect example would be Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, My Hero Academia, which has somewhat become the norm for shonen stuff, and especially Jump stuff. So yeah, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's long at 148 episodes, but not so long that you ever get worn out. There's always something happening with the story, and it's nowadays, I think some people see that as a long series, which it absolutely is, but also comparatively to like One Piece or even Naruto, it's still so much shorter, or even Inuyasha, things like that. It's so much shorter than what was the norm. So yeah, check it out if you haven't. We have some UK releases. The first one is a double dip, a rebuy for me. I still have my original set that I own. This is a more recent re-release in the UK, and I namely got it because this is one of my favorite series of all time, and especially one of my favorite series from this studio. And Funimation's branch in the UK has been releasing limited editions for a number of titles that have not yet previously been released in the UK, or not to any great capacity. So there's a couple from their upcoming limited editions that I have been eyeing. There's at least one other one that I want to get, but the one that I got this month of November was Hyouka, the complete series. This is a 23 episode series about a group of high school students who are all part of the literature club, technically, but in actuality they spend most of their time, well, just kind of noodling around. They don't engage too much in club activities. It's more so an excuse for them to hang out with their friends. But our main character, Oraki, is fantastic at making logical deductions, and he's quite a cynical young man. He isn't really enamored with this idea of high school being this fantastic experience. He just wants to live a very low energy life. He's just a little, like a lot of teens, a little bit disillusioned with life, and doesn't quite want to put in much effort into his day-to-days. But after meeting she's not a classmate, but one of his peers, she's in another class, Chitanda. He joins the literature club because his older sister, from overseas, tells him he has to join, and he's like, well, she knows martial arts and will beat me up if I don't, so I will do that. But Chitanda herself, she has joined the literature club in order to find out what happened to solve this mystery about her uncle. And so that sets the tone quite early, wherein a mystery is presented to our group of 4, because there are 2 other characters, Mayaka and Satoshi. And they all have they theorize about it, they try and figure out what has happened. And typically Oraki is I don't want to say this, but the Sherlock Holmes, making the logical deductions and typically coming up with the closest hypothesis to the truth and solving these mysteries. Something I always really appreciated about this series, that I think if you haven't seen it, or if you're more used to kind of the Detective Conan style of mystery, is that they're very low stakes. I think people see anime with teenage characters and they're expecting all of this bombastic, crazy, whether it be magical or just outright situations that are fantastical, that cannot exist in real life. Hyouka is not that. It is 100% rooted in reality, and all of the mysteries that these 15-year-olds are solving, they're not stumbling across murders. They're not, having to stop or solve a bank heist or something. It's normally oh, there was a really weird announcement on the thing, on the over the intercom last week or this afternoon. I wonder what that was about. And so it's not really necessarily anything that will change people's lives, but it gets these kids more involved with each other, with their school and their relationships with each other and with a lot of their other fellow students. And for every kind of mundane mystery that there is about, there was a weird announcement, or what were they saying over here? This student hasn't been, in class the last couple weeks, or I wonder what ever happened to this thing. They're all mundane, but they all lead to understanding how especially teens interact with the world and our place with finding, more so it's less about solving the mystery itself and more so about how the act of mystery solving, how the relationship of these characters who aren't really friends. Araki and Satoshi have known each other for a long time, and so has Mayaka, but they've never been super duper close. They've been classmates, but they never hung out that much before high school. And now with the addition of Chitanda in their friendship group, the way the dynamic has changed and why this new girl has become so invested in her kind of small mystery solving club at high school. It's very, very good. It has one of the most realistic depictions of character growth. The characters from the first episode are absolutely not the same characters by the last episode. The amount of very, very subtle personal growth that happens over the entirety of the series that by the time you reach the end, it's somewhat of a surprise to see how much has changed, how much their opinions or their attitudes have shifted, and how that's affected each of them. It's very good. And I would argue it's one of the most beautiful shows that Kyoto Animation has ever put out, especially for a television series, a longer television series. And even some of their current modern stuff is not nearly as beautifully done with framing, camera work, quote unquote, the beautiful symbolic scenes, the mix of animation styles. Hyouka really, for some reason, had a lot of love and a lot of care and perhaps a lot of money put into it, which is fantastic. And I mean, every Kyoto Animation series looks beautiful, and I love a lot of their shows. This is somewhat of the anomaly. It's one of their lesser prominent shows, even within the last... Man, has it really been 10 years since this one came out too? It was a good period in anime for me, personally. 2011, I think this came out. Yeah. So, and it still holds up. It's still gorgeous. It's still so beautiful. And I would highly encourage you to try it if you haven't. Next is another UK limited edition release. I also have the previous releases of this one too, but this is the full series in a box. And this is an interesting little show. It's not one that is inherently easy to recommend, but I think perhaps now has a more accepting audience willing for it versus when it was airing. So that is Samurai Flamenco, or Samumenko. This is the story of a young actor who has actor model kind of, talent, who has always loved, tokusatsu kind of masked hero series. He's always wanted to play a masked hero. He really believes in this kind of greater moral good, wherein a masked hero will come fight a monster and save the day and protect the community. He's just very, very personally pure and genuine and innocent. And so he becomes this vigilante kind of masked fighter on the streets of his neighborhood. And he runs into our other main character, who is a police officer, who obviously is supposed to be within law enforcement, is represents the people who actually protect the community. And although he doesn't inherently really understand why this young guy is super into this, he ultimately does help him and try to support him in that. But this series, I think, for a lot of people who watched it as it came out, myself included, the first several episodes present themselves as something, and then there's a very big shift at about episode 5 or 6, wherein this series that seemed very grounded in a certain aspect, wherein all of the tech was stuff that was part of the real. There was in-world explanations for how all of this could have happened or why things were happening, and then partway through, it's like, oh wait, actually, all of these monsters, all of these tokusatsu monsters are showing up in real life, and this isn't a thing. This is, we're gonna have all of these monsters, and then we're gonna have an alien invasion, and the scaling up of the threat and how that impacts our characters. And I think that threw a lot of people off. It's also a series that unfortunately it was made kind of late within Manglobe's career. This is definitely one of the series that financially ruined them. This did not make its investment back. And as such, it at times looks very shoddy. Not a lot of money being put into the budget. But having now... so I dropped it, or I put it on hold when I was watching it. It was just, again, I don't think anyone quite knew what to take from it. It's also not, like, I personally don't have a history with tokusatsu, or even, when Power Rangers was really big, I never watched much of it, so I didn't have that personal connection or investment in that aspect of the series. But having finished it for the first time over the COVID period and revisited it, I think it works much more in kind of a post Gridman or SSSS Gridman and Dynazamon world, a world wherein, and like the recent Godzilla anime, the not so recent but the Gatchaman crowds like reimagining, all of those series are working to represent or to recapture this or give a new feel to these series that were very formative for people who are now in the industry creating these series, and seeing, in a similar sense, to seeing how Anno is making live action versions of all of his favorite stuff, whether it be Godzilla, whether it be Kamen Rider. Is that the one? He's got like 2 or 3 Ultramans in the works, where things that these people loved as children and respected and were very formative to them, they are now able to create these loving homages and loving reimaginings and reinterpretations of. And I think that's really lovely, honestly. I think there's a lot of good that that these series present. And although, again, I think Samurai Flamenco is messy, it's highly imperfect, but I do think that it probably would fare better and will fare better with people now if they gave it a chance versus when it aired. Yeah, give it a try if you haven't. The series never got released in the US on disc, but it is streaming on Crunchyroll, I believe, still. If you are wanting a Blu-ray release, English friendly, subtitle only, then I would recommend you picking up the UK release, which is this one. They previously put out like a 2-part limited edition from all of the anime, or Anime Limited, but this is the new collected box set. So it's really up to you which one. Well, if you're only getting into it now, this is probably the better option because it's newer, it's still in print, and you can get it at pretty decent price because even now it is not a very popular series. But certainly not least. In fact, I'd argue that probably best for last. Another UK release, although this is a similar release across the board. I know folks in the US are just getting their copies now. I bought this from the UK. Australia is not getting their release of this till late or middle of next year, so pre-orders have just opened up for it, but it's still a ways off. That is, of course, Neon Genesis Evangelion, the complete series plus films, Death and Rebirth, and then End of Evangelion. This is the collector's edition. It's not the ultimate edition, and I was never going to buy that because that's just too much tat and unruly packaging. And I do love Evangelion. I don't $600 love Evangelion. So this is the edition wherein we have the full original anime series plus the 2 films in both the newer Netflix dub and the older ADV Genion, whatever, ADV dub. So it contains both of the voice casts. It does not have Fly Me to the Moon, which is across the board, again, outside of Japan. I don't think any of the releases have had Fly Me to the Moon. Maybe some of the Asian releases, because I feel like there are different licensors to that song in those countries, but typically all of the European editions and all of the English speaking editions do not have Fly Me to the Moon at the end, which was what happened with when Netflix released their version anyway. So, take it or leave it. That's just the way it is. And then a whole bunch of additional bonus content, video content. There's a big booklet. There's a bunch of art cards. And yeah, so Neon Genesis Evangelion really doesn't need any introduction. I feel like most people know what it is, are aware of the series, especially over the last year with the final rebuild film having been released to much mixed review, which is kind of this whole state of affairs always with Eva. I really liked it. That might be controversial to say. There's definitely a lot of dumb stuff. There's definitely too much talking, and just, lore dropping that never ever, always in Evangelion, just is there for the visual equivalent of set dressing. It never actually means too much. But I think that what it represented for the characters, for the director, and for the Evangelion community as a whole was a finality that I really appreciated. And I did enjoy it. Like, I know there's people who prefer one version over the other and all sorts of things. I'm one of those people. I like to see how things get adapted and reimagined over the course of multiple adaptations. So I like them both for what they are. This is the original, though, Evangelion. This is the series that started it all. It's the series that has been much beloved, much derided. A series that is about so many things, but also not the things that people always get hung up about when we talk about some of the criticisms. It's a series that for a long time, and I have seen the attitude change over the last several years, which is really nice, but suffered from a real issue with people delegitimizing or complaining about the main character, most notably Shinji, as well as all of the other characters. Like, there's two very separate parts of Evangelion fandom. There's the ones who deep dive into all of the symbology, all of the lore, try to make sense of what everything represents, and all of the, Christian iconography and how things all tie into each other, which is wonderful and, I think very a good way to analyze any sort of media. I think there's always potential for this kind of more academic look into stories, but also that I do feel kind of exacerbates this idea that Evangelion is super duper smart and everything it says means something. I just don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of, especially the Christianity stuff, that's there for aesthetic more than any deep meaning. But I'm also not the one writing theses on it, so perhaps perhaps I'm just missing something very obvious. But that is one side of the fandom. And then the other side is like, well, but Asuka is best girl. Oh no, Rei's best girl. We're gonna fight. No, you're both wrong. Misato's best girl. That kind of very reductionist level of consuming anything, but especially engaging with this sort of story. And I think, again, not to keep going back to the Rebuild series, but I think the last movie gave an ending, gave a finality to both of those groups of people, and was like, just please, this is it, stop. You can rest now. It's been 25 years. It's been longer, but it's been so much time. Just stop. And to that I appreciate. I think Evangelion's always been a reflection of the director, Hideaki Anno, who I mentioned previously. His mental state, his personal beliefs, how he feels about himself and how he interacts with the world, and his relationships is very emblematic of his life. And I'm glad now that Evangelion is done and over and never has to be revisited again, because now he's able to work on all of these passion projects that he is infinitely more invested in and loves, and doesn't keep pulling him back to the point where he was at the lowest part of his depression and the most, one of the hardest parts of his life, and being heralded as genius. And I'm sure Evangelion is brilliant. I don't want to delegitimize it. I also don't think it's a series for everyone, but I do think that it is a bona fide classic that has earned its right for its accolades. I'm glad that people nowadays are more sympathetic to the entire cast, but especially Shinji, and his personal choices and growth and interactions over the course of the series. And yeah, so I don't really need to introduce Evangelion to anyone, right? This is a series that everyone knows. Even if you haven't seen it, you know of it. It's available on Netflix if you are wanting to watch it. I do have this set that has both English dubs on there. I am someone who grew up, quote unquote, with the ADV dub. I think it's very solid. I haven't watched the entirety of, or I haven't really watched much at all of the Netflix dub, but I do think that there is a lot of good in that cast as well, and how that series, that dub, presented the series. There's issues for all, like both of them. Neither is perfect, and again, it's an interesting conversation as to adaptation and how different groups and different, creators and people in charge interpret things. And it, two separate dubs with very different delivery and tone is quite interesting. And you look at and then there's even a third dub with the same majority of the same cast from the ADV/Funimation releases, but with different creators or different people in charge of that dub through the Amazon Prime release of the last movie. Anyway, dubs and subs and all of these arguments, whatever, right? I hate getting caught up in, oh, this is better, that one's, I hate this one, oh no, like sub supremacy, blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. Enjoy what you want. I do think, like, I understand people who are upset that the ADV cast for the original series is kind of paywalled or locked behind this more expensive collector's edition versus the standard edition, which only has the Netflix dub discs. But I feel like if you are an Evangelion fan that cares that much, that you either have the money saved, put aside, whatever else, for a fancier edition, or you own the previous DVD releases in some capacity. It's not like, one means that there's nothing left of the other. I did see a lot of people picking up the older, like, platinum collection releases, etc., DVD releases, that have been around forever, right? The last 20 years, in order to get the original dub, or to have Fly Me to the Moon included, or whatever else. I understand as a fan, and I also understand as a collector, wanting the most comprehensive version of things you can get. And that's not a wrong sentiment to have. But I also understand why an older dub is kept as a bonus feature of a more pricey collector's edition. I understand why the new dub or the new standard expectation with the subtitles and whatever else is the general release. And ultimately, that is, having put the series on Netflix, that is what a majority of people, of especially young people who are just experiencing Evangelion for the first time, are familiar with. There's no real winning, right? There's no real winning in these situations. And ultimately, it is this question of, well, how much does this actually impact your enjoyment? How much do you actually care about there being a missing dub, or there, Fly Me to the Moon being missing, or whatever else? And if you're someone who only watches this subtitled, right, then maybe the standard edition is fine, because you never listen to the dub anyway. And it's, again, a different subtitle script. But I think also people who have seen Evangelion that many times, the iffy little, grammatical child versus children, or, you know, worthy of your grace, and whatever else, like, quirks of the Netflix subtitles, you're already familiar enough with the previous version or whatever else version that you've experienced thus far, that it shouldn't be an issue. Your brain is good at recognizing and replacing things. That's why we have them. Yeah, I know. Again, there was never any way to really win this with this release and make everybody happy, especially for such a notable series, because it has become, in the same way that, you know, the live action Cowboy Bebop was never going to be unconditionally loved and accepted by anime fans because it's so formative. And even if it would, I can't speak to it. I haven't watched it. I don't want to, just because I don't have time, and I've heard nothing but pretty mixed reviews, generally trending bad. But it's also, you know, there's so many people across the world for so many years, so many decades, that have experienced this and been fans and fallen in love with Cowboy Bebop in the same way that they have with the original Evangelion, that there is no way to have a release that keeps all of those people happy. There's just no way. If it wasn't songwrite stuff, it would be the dub. If it wasn't any of that, it would be the price point. Because ultimately there was never going to be, for a series this prominent, for a license that I have a very high likelihood it was atrociously expensive. There was no way for them to recoup costs in ways that would please everyone. But I think ultimately this is the most understandable middle ground. I did buy this version because of the original dub, but also because of the box. I do enjoy, you know, I don't hate the Netflix dub. I actually did like it for the small bits and pieces that I've heard. Most notably Casey, I don't remember their name, the new voice actor for Shinji in particular, I thought they did a fantastic job. I really, really liked their Shinji. But, you know, that's the end of my controversial takes. It's nice to finally have such a important, formative, classic series available on Blu-ray now. And yeah, it's been a long road, but well worth the wait, I think. And it also allows all of us to upgrade to the absolutely incredible Blu-ray quality of this series, because man oh man, those old DVDs are janky looking. Like, people, yeah, this has its issues. I'm not gonna say it doesn't, but if you haven't watched your DVDs of Evangelion recently, the interlacing alone is just so bad. And I'm not a visual, like, you know, stickler for these sorts of things. I don't notice a lot of what people complain about with video quality on Blu-ray forums and things. But those old DVDs, the video quality, the audio quality, the manga release of End of Evangelion was like double letterboxed, so it was like a tiny little thing. It doesn't take up the entire screen of your. It's just so many problems. But yeah, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Not a series that needs much introduction. This release seems to be the most popular out of the two. Again, as mentioned beforehand, I've seen people in the US get their copies now. I got this several weeks ago through the UK, which was early as well. So, but a batch of UK buyers got theirs on, they were released at much earlier, and it just took a while to get to me. And if you're really wanting this particular set, which has been sold out everywhere since day one in the US and the UK, you may want to look into importing the Australian set, which I presume is the same. I don't think there's region coding on this. Maybe there might be region locking. I don't know. But if you're desperate, and even just for the packaging, and you don't mind, or you have some capacity to watch region B Blu-ray, then you may want to keep an eye out for the Australian release. But yeah, that's it. Those were my anime purchases or anime receives. Is that how you say that? I don't think so. But that is all of the anime that I got for November. Not only 5 releases, but some really fantastic series in there. Series that have been very formative to my experience as a fan. A lot of beloved, well-known, enjoyed high-profile series, and then a couple smaller, quirky, lesser-known titles in there as well. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on any of the series that I talked about today. Have you gotten your copy of Evangelion? Do you have Sword Art Online? I feel like maybe that's a series that you can get in the Right Stuff sale right now if you're in the US or UK. Not UK, Canada. I mean, you could, but why would you do that when you have a local release that is much cheaper? Are you hanging out for a Samurai Flamenco release? Maybe. Or are you jealous that Funimation UK put out a limited edition release for Hyouka despite it only ever getting a standard release in the US? I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because the series initially came out when they had stopped doing limited editions for a while. But yeah, bit of a mix of stuff. Let me know your thoughts, feelings, whatever else down below. I love reading your comments. If you're new to the channel and you have survived this super long video, then congratulations. Wow, welcome. And if you did enjoy it and you are not already, consider subscribing, or don't, either way. But if you did enjoy this and you're wanting to follow my content, I post on a semi-regular basis. I always have my monthly hauls. I also do a monthly podcast with my good friend Ray from Whimsical Pictures. That's called Read Right to Left. You can also find me on Twitter, which link will be down below, but also at CollectingG if you're just wanting to look it up. And that is, of course, GEE, like in the username. What else? I have my complete collection video coming up sometime this month. I don't know when. It'll probably be closer to the end of the year, just because that's when I'm on Christmas vacation and I actually have time to film and stuff. A lot of stuff has changed over the last year, very notably, so maybe one to keep an eye out for if you are so interested. Yeah, otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye till then.